Daniel Cowan. He died in 2016, aged just 29, after using recreational drugs. He wasn't an addict, but his family say he paid for his decision to use illegal drugs with his life. Well, Daniel's dad, Andy, is with me now. Also with me is Dr. Victor Olise, a former chief superintendent with the Metropolitan Police who worked on several big drugs cases during his career. Good evening to you both. Andy, if you could start by telling us about Daniel and what happened to him.
Well, Daniel was 29 and he was celebrating a new job. He's one of 3 children that we have, very, very close family. And Daniel was a very gregarious young man. He loved life and he loved his family very much. And he was simply out with a friend celebrating, and the next morning they tried to resuscitate him. He was staying with a friend and they couldn't resuscitate him, and we only found out about it, the next day, and the cause of death, it transpired, was an overdose of MDMA and heroin, which they think may have been fentanyl. That was obviously very devastating for us. We had no indication really that Daniel was even taking drugs, but it transpired that his friend had actually acquired them on the dark web, and this is something that's mentioned in the report. They were ordered on the dark web and they were taken as part of a kind of celebration, as many, many young people do. But obviously his death has, devastated our family and been very difficult for us, and we've had to reassess lots of the ways that we think about these things. And
in your reassessment, you argue that decriminalisation of drugs is the answer, even Class A drugs.
Well, the starting point for that is to imagine a world where Daniel would be taking a drug like MDMA, but not buying it from the dark web, maybe going down to a chemist who was licensed to sell MDMA, and perhaps the drug had been manufactured by a legitimate company that was heavily regulated and had to abide by certain rules and regulations. And so the emphasis there would be on safety. So was Daniel going to be able to take a drug, if he was going to take a drug? And the report tells us that 3 million users in England and Wales take drugs. 70 million people across the world are drug users. And if these people are going to take drugs, how can we make it as safe as possible for them to take their drugs? And that is the key question. If there was a legal industry of drug supply and distribution and manufacture, then we would be saving lives.
Dr. Olise, you have seen that fight against drugs gangs on the streets.
Yes.
When working for the Metropolitan Police. What do you think is the answer?
I think, it's a sad story from Andy, and commiserations, although it's a long time ago.
Thank you.
But I think we need to have a discussion around decriminalisation.
Really, you do think that?
I do think that.
Even Class A drugs?
Even Class A drugs. We need to have that discussion. Whether or not we decriminalise Class A drugs is a different thing, but certainly things like cannabis. Again, the report is actually highlighting the significant number of people who use cannabis on a recreational basis. And as a professional police officer, I knew that my officers, when they did stop and search, the vast majority of the outcome were drug seizures. But the real disappointing thing was, although my officers were making contact with some of the people who were using the drugs, some of the people who were actually selling the drugs, small scale, what happens when these people go into the criminal justice system? They come straight out again.
Have you always had this view, or did this change during your time as a police officer?
I think I've had the view for a long time. Seeing the level of activity that goes into policing low-level drugs, and seeing the people going into the criminal justice system within a few weeks and months coming out again, it's just like a revolving door. So we've always needed a multidisciplinary group of people to actually not only do the enforcement, but the supporting and the prevention. And we've had teams doing this before, and with all the cuts they've gone, so drug intervention teams, drug action teams working together collaboratively, these things had some successes. But when you remove the funding and the costing and remove these teams, this is what happens. It just spirals out of control again.
Andy, there would be a lot of parents worried by the idea of their children being able to buy drugs legally, and the dangers that could also have, even legitimate drugs that's not on the black market, not laced with anything, you can still die from that.
I think the issue is that there is an onslaught of supply of drugs, and the report actually talks about this, and the report talks about the multitude of times that we've tried to curtail the supply of drugs, and these attempts haven't been effective. So these drugs are available, and you mentioned in your introduction that they're as easy to buy as a pizza. So this is not a question of how young people are going to access drugs. They will access drugs if they want drugs. This is a question of an acceptance in society that will happen, and therefore creating an industry which can manufacture and supply safe drugs. Now, of course, drugs have drawbacks, and drugs will not always be safe. But having them in an environment that's regulated and is safer will save lives.
Do you think it would have made a difference to Daniel?
Of course. I think that because of the poison with fentanyl, that's probably what killed Daniel. I think Daniel would still be alive if we had decriminalised and legalised drugs.
Andy Cowan and Dr. Victor Olise, really good talking to you both. Thank you.
Thank you.